two boys haven't eaten for days. Their father hasn't felt in years. In a house ruled by silence, the smallest voices hold the power. Subscribe to Seoul and Sable Stories. Some stories don't knock. They wait. The Hanam-dong residence of Kang Min-ho did not look like a place where grief lived. It looked, to anyone who visited, like a place where grief had been formally notified of its presence and escorted from the premises. The architecture was precise, clean lines, floor-to-ceiling glass, rooms arranged for function rather than warmth. The staff moved with the efficiency of people who had learned to interpret silence as instruction. The art on the walls had been selected by a consultant and communicated nothing personal. Even the photographs, and there were very few, had been framed and placed with the deliberation of evidence rather than memory. Kang Min-ho had built his empire the way he had built this house. Methodically. Without sentiment. He had started in logistics, moved into private equity, and expanded into the kind of infrastructure investments that governments quietly depended on without publicly acknowledging. He was 41 years old, fluent in 3 languages, and had not cried since the night his wife's body was brought back to Seoul from a car accident on a mountain road in Gangwon Province 3 years ago. He hadn't cried then either, witnesses noted later. He had stood very still in the hospital corridor for 4 minutes and 11 seconds. A colleague had counted, nervously, not knowing what else to do, and then he had made a phone call. He had 6-year-old twin sons who were, by every measurable standard, exceptional. Jin was precise, architecturally minded, already capable of memorizing floor plans and city maps with a single viewing. Jae was perceptive in the way that unsettled adults. He had a habit of identifying what people were not saying, of naming the air in a room before anyone else knew it had a name. They were not difficult children. They were, in fact, extraordinarily well-behaved. That was what Dr. Adaeze Obi noticed first, on the morning she arrived. The boys were seated at the breakfast table when she was shown through to meet them. They sat with their spines straight, and their hands folded and their eyes on the door, and when she walked in, they assessed her with the calm, unreadable patience of people who had been assessed many times themselves and had decided assessment was simply the language of arrival. "Annyeonghaseyo," she said, in her careful, studied Korean. "Good morning." The twins exchanged a glance, quick, barely perceptible, and then Jae said, in English, perfectly, "Your accent is Yoruba-influenced." "Are you Nigerian?" "I am," Adaeze said. "Our last specialist was from Canada," Jin said. Not unkindly. Simply noting a fact. "And before that?" "Japan," said Jae. "She lasted 4 months." Adaeze sat down across from them without being invited, which made Jin's eyes flicker with something that might have been approval. "What happened to her?" she asked. The boys looked at each other again. "Appa said she wasn't a good fit," Jin said. "What did you think?" Jae picked up his chopsticks and turned them once, slowly, between his fingers. She was afraid of him. You can tell when someone is trying to behave correctly instead of actually behaving. Adaeze studied this child, this 6-year-old child with his careful, telescoping perception, and felt the particular feeling she only got when she walked into a house that was grieving in secret. A low hum in the air. Something held too tightly for too long, beginning, almost imperceptibly, to shake. "And am I afraid?" she asked. Jae looked at her for a long moment. "Not yet," he said. Kang Min-ho received her in his study at 9 a.m. precisely. He stood when she entered, a formality, not a warmth, and gestured to the chair across his desk with the practiced ease of a man who conducted all encounters as negotiations. He was taller than she had expected. Not imposing, but contained. The kind of contained that came from decades of deciding exactly how much of himself to allow into any given room. "Dr. Obi," he said. "I reviewed your credentials. Your work with children of bereaved parents is noted. I want to be clear about the scope of your engagement here." He opened a folder. "My sons are developmentally advanced, but socially behind their age cohort. They have difficulty forming peer relationships. They display what my previous consultant described as," he paused, and she saw the slight tightening around his eyes, "emotional avoidance." "Emotional avoidance," Adaeze repeated. "Yes. And who do you believe they learned that from?" The room did not change temperature. Minho's expression did not change. But the air shifted in the particular way it did when something true had been said inside a space that was not used to truth. They will benefit from structured social engagement exercises, he said, without answering her question. Peer interaction protocols. Communication skill development. You'll provide weekly reports. Your access to their schedule will be coordinated through my assistant, Mrs. Yoon. Any observations of a sensitive nature are to be communicated to me directly, not documented in files that circulate to other staff. Of course, Adaeze said. And their mother? Do they speak of her? Min-ho closed the folder. That is not relevant to the therapeutic objectives. With respect, Mr. Kang, in grief work. This is not grief work. This is developmental support. She looked at him. He looked back. They were both very still. Understood, she said. She left his study knowing two things. The first was that the boys were not the source of the emotional avoidance in this household. The second was that she had, at most, for months before Min-ho found a reason to escort her off the premises, the same way he had escorted grief off them 3 years ago. She intended to use every day. It took Adaeze 3 weeks to understand the boys' system. They were not cold. Coldness implies deliberate withdrawal. The twins had simply never been given a template for warmth that was not also complicated by loss. Their mother, Park So-young, a sculptor and a woman whom every piece of surviving evidence suggested had been the kind of person rooms brightened around, had died when they were 3. They had memories of her the way children have memories of their earliest years, more sensory than narrative. The smell of her. A laugh. The specific texture of her hands. Their father had never spoken of her to them. Not because he was cruel, but because he had no language for it. Grief, for Kang Min-ho, was not a room he entered. It was a room he had walled off and never acknowledged the existence of, and over 3 years his sons had learned to build their own walls along the same lines. Jae was the first to show Adaeze the photographs. They were in a shoebox under his bed, not hidden exactly, but stored with the careful discretion of something precious that he had decided not to trouble his father with. Pictures printed from a phone, slightly grainy, their mother holding them as infants. Their mother in her studio, clay gray up to her elbows, laughing at whoever held the camera. Their mother and their father at what appeared to be a quiet dinner, his hand over hers on the table, both of them looking at something out of frame. Where did you get these? Adaeze asked. Aunt Sujin sent them last year, Jae said. On Iyama's birthday. I didn't tell Appa. Why not? Jae was quiet for a moment. He was very good at quiet, the kind of quiet that was actually full, that was doing work. Because when people mention her to him, he gets very still. Like he's not breathing. And then he leaves the room. So we stopped mentioning her. Adaeze looked at the photographs for a long time. Do you miss her? She asked. Jae thought about this with the same serious deliberation he brought to all important questions. I miss the idea of her, he said finally. Is that the same thing? It can be, Adaeze said. It can hurt just as much. He looked at her. Something in his face shifted, a microscopic yielding, the way a very tightly closed fist looks when one finger, just one, uncurls. Jin doesn't look at the pictures, he said. He says it's not useful. And what do you think? Jae put the box back carefully, exactly where it had been. I think Jin learned that from Appa. And I think Appa is wrong. But I don't know how to say that to him without it sounding like an accusation. Adaeze drove home that evening and sat in her car for 15 minutes before starting the engine, thinking about a 6-year-old boy who understood the difference between truth and accusation more precisely than most adults she had ever treated. In the 8th week, Adaeze filed her interim clinical notes. She had been careful. She was always careful in the way that Black women in spaces of concentrated white and Korean power learn to be careful, which is to say, thorough, documented, specific, and impossible to dismiss as feeling rather than evidence. Her notes did not speculate. They observed. She observed that both children displayed prolonged grief responses consistent with unprocessed loss. She observed that the primary attachment figure in the household modeled emotional suppression as the standard response to distress. She observed that Jin had begun refusing to attend the birthday parties of classmates, citing schedule conflicts that did not exist. She observed that Jae had started asking questions, with increasing frequency, about what happened to people who died, not morbid questions, but logistical ones. The kind a child asks when they are trying to construct a framework for something that no one will explain to them. And she wrote, in the section reserved for recommendations, therapeutic progress for the children is structurally limited until the primary caregiver receives support in processing his own unresolved grief. The household dynamic currently teaches the children that loss is something to be administratively managed rather than humanly experienced. Until this changes, I recommend that the scope of this engagement be expanded to include family sessions. She filed the notes through the secure portal. Min-ho read them at 11:47 p.m., which she learned later because Mrs. Yoon's access logs showed his credentials on the portal at that time. He called her at 7 a.m. the following morning. Your contract specifies developmental support for the children, he said. His voice was exactly as it always was, level, precise, uninflected. This was the thing about a man who kept his emotion locked in a sealed room. He was the same in crisis as he was in calm. It does not specify assessment of my personal psychology. With respect, Mr. Kang, I can't effectively support the boys without. Your contract ends at the close of this month. A pause. Mrs. Yoon will arrange your final payment and the non-disclosure terms. Thank you for your work with my sons. The call ended. Adaeze sat with her phone in her hand for a long moment. She thought about Jae's face when he told her that Jin had learned not to look at the photographs. She thought about Jin's precise, careful silence during their sessions, the silence that was not peace, but architecture, a structure he had built over a void he had never been given permission to name. She thought about Min-ho at 11:47 p.m., reading her words alone in his study, in a house full of glass and clean lines and absence. She texted the number she had been given for emergencies only. It rang twice. I understand your decision, she said when he answered. But before I go, I want you to know something. Your sons are not broken. They are hungry. And they learned hunger from you. Whatever you decide, please feed them. Even if you can't feed yourself yet, please feed them. He did not respond. She ended the call and began packing her materials. The twins found out that evening. Not because anyone told them. No one in the Kang household told children difficult things directly. That was not how the household communicated. They found out because Mrs. Yoon had the particular energy of someone managing a situation, and both boys were very good at reading particular energies. Jae went to find Jin in his room. Jin was building something. He was always building something. Architectural models made from kits their father ordered from an engineering supply company in Germany. She's leaving, Jae said. Jin set down the piece he was holding. When? End of the month. Appa let her go. Jin was quiet. He picked up the piece again and turned it in his fingers. Why? Because she said something true about him, and he didn't want to hear it. Another silence. The piece turned. What did she say? I don't know exactly. But I think it was about Yama. Jin set the piece down again, very carefully, and looked at his architectural model, a half-finished structure, all clean lines and functional geometry. And Jae watched his brother's face do the thing it did when Jin was processing something he had decided not to feel. Okay, Jin said. That's all? Okay. Jin looked at him. What else is there to say? Jae stared at his twin for a long time. He was thinking of the photographs in the shoebox. He was thinking of the way Adaeze had asked him, simply, without flinching, do you miss her? And the way that question had felt, not like a wound, but like a window. Like someone opening something that had been sealed. I'm not hungry, Jae said. Jin frowned. We haven't eaten dinner yet. I know. I'm still not hungry. He left Jin's room and went to his own and sat on his bed and looked at the wall. At dinner. The chairs where the twins usually sat were occupied by their presence, but not, somehow, by them. They ate 2 or 3 bites each and pushed the rest around their plates with the mechanical courtesy of people performing a social function they had decided was no longer meaningful. Min-ho noticed. He noticed everything. It was his professional obligation and his personal compulsion. Eat, he said, without looking up from his own meal. I'm not hungry, Appa, Jae said. You'll be hungry later. Eat now. I don't think I will be. Min-ho looked at his younger son. Jae looked back. There was nothing defiant in his face, no anger, no challenge. Only a quiet, unreadable stillness that Min-ho recognized with a shock he carefully did not show, because he had seen that face in a mirror for 3 years. "Is something wrong?" he asked. "No," said Jae. "Jin." "Nothing is wrong," Jin said. He took a small, precise bite and chewed it thoroughly and set his chopsticks down. The meal ended without further incident. The boys were dismissed to their rooms. Min-ho sat alone at the long table as the staff cleared the dishes and thought about the word hunger in a context he had not expected. The next morning, the twins ate 3 bites of breakfast. The morning after that, too. On the 4th day, Mrs. Yoon appeared at the door of his study at 8 a.m. with the expression of someone who had decided the news they carried was above their pay grade. "Mr. Kang, the boys haven't eaten a full meal since Monday." He looked at her. "Have they said why?" "No, sir. When I ask, they say they're not hungry." He was quiet for a moment. "Call their physician." "Yes, sir." And she hesitated. "Sir, should I call Dr. Obi?" Min-ho turned to look out the window. Below, in the courtyard garden, the October trees were stripping themselves bare with the efficiency of things that had stopped pretending warmth was coming. A city full of glass and stone and people moving at the velocity of ambition, and somewhere in it a woman was packing her professional materials and preparing to leave a house that needed her more than it knew. He thought of what she had said. Not from the phone call, from earlier, from her clinical notes, which he had read 3 times in the small hours of the morning when he told himself he was only reading them to assess their accuracy. The household dynamic currently teaches the children that loss is something to be administratively managed rather than humanly experienced. He thought of Jae's face at the dinner table. That exact stillness. That familiar, terrible, learned stillness. "Don't call the physician yet," he said. Mrs. Yoon waited. "Call Dr. Obi," he said. "Tell her I would like to meet." "Yes, sir." "Should I schedule it for next week?" "Today." "Tell her I would like to meet today." He turned back to his window. In the courtyard, a single leaf released from its branch and fell with the particular, unresisted grace of something that has decided to let go. Min-ho watched it fall. The leaf drifted once in the cold air before settling against the stone below. The courtyard remained still, unchanged, but he wasn't. Somewhere behind the sealed door in his chest, something shifted. A faint tremor. Small. Careful. Unavoidable. It had been waiting 3 years for permission to move. And tonight, it finally did. End of part 1. Part 2 will be out soon, where silence stops protecting him, and the door he sealed shut begins to open on its own. If you felt that shift, stay with us. Like, comment, and subscribe to Seoul and Sable Stories so you don't miss what waits on the other side.